This is Garis, masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 506, entitled Institutionalized Feminism Will Feel Threatened by the Rise of Masculism. Description. Feminism is so widely spread and institutionalized in our culture that the rise of masculism will be profoundly shocking to feminists who have believed for the past 6 decades that gender oppression is a one-way street. The rise of angry, hateful masculists who see women as the greater gender oppressors with their many decades-lasting gender crimes against men will cause a masculist tsunami that will crush this institutionalized feminist industry, forcing women in their millions to become biconscious or be cast out of society and out of men's lives. Flyer itself. Institutionalized feminism will feel threatened by the rise of masculism. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Modern feminism has been with us for nearly 6 decades now. It started with the publication of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, which complained about the ennui that upper middle class housewives were feeling, being stuck at home, bored out of their minds, while their 2 children were off to school. Friedan pushed women to take up the male role of being careerists. Then in the late 60s, young women got together in female consciousness raising groups and started lashing out at men for the ways that men blocked women's access to their new female careerist role, and against rape, unequal pay for equal work, the need for an abortion right, for fault-free divorce, etc. As a result of all this feminist consciousness raising, over the past 6 decades, a slew, an industry of feminist institutions have been set up in parliaments, in governments, in universities, in schools, and in the minds of billions of women. In short, feminism has become institutionalized. It has penetrated every nook and cranny of society, changing the way both sexes see women, and has led to many changes in both attitudes and laws. As a result of 6 decades of feminist ideology, virtually all women are now what the masculists call monoconscious. That is, have only had their feminist consciousness raised, so are aware of how men oppress women. For example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence against women, etc. Not surprisingly, these monoconscious feminists are angry at men, since they are very aware of how men oppress women. So many feminists feel fully justified in labelling men as pigs, rapists, toxic, etc., and do not question this anger. They feel they have plenty of reason to be angry. So in many cases do not hide their anger, resulting in a general ethos amongst many women that it's socially acceptable to dump on men publicly, expressing their deep felt contempt for men. Then along comes masculism, which tells women, that is feminists, that in reality gender oppression is a 2-way street, that women oppress men too, TWO, and significantly worse than vice versa. Most masculists, like myself, are biconscious, which means, by definition, that they have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. That is, they are as familiar with how men oppress women, as taught them by feminism, as how women oppress men, as taught them by masculism. Masculists preach to men that in fact women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades in capital letters, and hence are far more significant than the relatively minor ways in which men oppress women. For example, even rape, which is one of the major ways that men oppress women, is small beer in comparison with women's decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism of men. Masculists estimate that about 80% of young women choose to become what the masculists call fluffy crappers. A fluffy is a masculist label based on the word fluff for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life, thus manslaving him for decades, a major gender crime against him, making her hated as a manslaver by the masculists. Fluffy crappers choose to study fluffy crap majors at high school and college, making them fluffies as adults, who then go looking for some gullible, ignorant, stupid, manslavable man to get her financial claws into, expecting him to pay for the middle-class house she wants to raise her kids in. To her manslave is just that, a man-slave, who works for her for no pay from her. Thus, by definition, he is a slave. To have your masculine consciousness raised is essentially to see fluffydom as manslavery, and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated, a war issue. So the masculists are at war against manslaving vermin fluffies, aiming to wipe them out by totally ignoring them, forcing their fluffy parasite genes to be removed from the gene pool. Masculists have an even greater hatred of fluffy feminists, who masculists see not only as hypocrites, in brackets, wanting equal rights with men in the parliaments, but rejecting equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living by not bothering to FIP up, in brackets, FIP equals financially independent person, by not bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, having a life plan in the back of their fluffy heads that some gullible, manslavable man will work for her so she can sit on her fluffy manslaving ass and have her manslave work for her for decades of his life, thus committing a major and hateful gender crime against him. Even worse is the fact that fluffy feminists are genociders. It's bad enough that fluffy feminists are fluffies and hence manslavers, but they have become indirect genociders since they have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for males that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for males. So much so that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, and choose to live the MGTOW, men going their own way, lifestyle, not marrying, rejecting paternity and spending their money on themselves, thus crashing the birth rate and wiping out whole populations. But the root cause of this population crash is the toxicity of the divorce courts created by the hated monoconscious feminists who run them. Thus masculists see these monoconscious feminist divorce court lawyers and judges as genociders who have to be stopped with bullets if necessary in a sex war. Masculists point out to women, especially to feminists, that it was men who liberated women from household drudgery, giving women science-based medicine, the pill, household gadgets, higher education, etc., so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century. So masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up, or be severely punished by men, in capital letters, by not getting one. As more and more men become infected by the masculist virus, learning that in fact women oppress men far worse. Women's decades-lasting manslavery of men is not the only decades-lasting gender crime that women commit against men. Other such examples are women's paternity fraud, where in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father, thus causing the husband to work for decades of his life to pay for a kid that is, in capital letters, not even his. This is a major gender crime by women against men and deserves the hatred coming from masculists towards such gender criminal women who commit these crimes. This is the end of part 1.